You're listening to the Fierce Fatty podcast. I'm your host, Vinny Wellsby. Today we're talking about organized anti-fat fuckery with Tigress Osbourn. Let's do it.
Perfect.
Hello, welcome to this special episode where we have a guest. Oh my goodness, I'm so excited. We're going to just get straight into it and introduce Tigress to you. Hello, Tigress. Welcome to the show.
Hello.
How you doing? How's life?
So excited to be here.
How excited on a scale of 1 to 10?
42.
Yeah, it's amazing. I love it. 42. Now, obviously, Tigress, you're an icon to me and I know all about you. But for those who don't know who you are, scandalous, how can they not know who you are? But for those who don't know who you are, can you give us an intro to you?
Sure. I'm Tigress. I use she, her pronouns. I live in the Southwestern United States, and I am the executive director of NAAFA, which is the National Association to Advance Fat Acceptance. And NAAFA is the oldest documented fat rights organization, started in 1969. So we're turning 55 this year. And we work on making the world a better place for fat people. We unapologetically use the F word in doing that work. Some of the other stuff we're going to talk about today makes me want to use the other F word, but by this I mean fat. We unapologetically use the word fat in our work because we want to destigmatize that work and really have people thinking about fat as just a natural part of human diversity, and one that should be protected from discrimination socially, legally, culturally, all of that.
Mm-hmm. And how long have you been at NAAFA?
I have been at NAAFA. Well, I did my first volunteer work with NAAFA in 2012 when they invited me to produce a fashion show at one of their conferences. I used to run a plus size nightclub event in Oakland, California called Full Figure Entertainment. And I had these Full Figure Friday parties. It was a hip hop party. It was like a Black centered Oakland hip hop party, but with the intention of being like a good, welcoming, affirming space for fat folks of all genders. We had a lot of focus on like, fat ladies and the people who like fat ladies, but we really did try to make it a gender inclusive environment and a welcoming environment to, like centering fat Black women, and fat women of color, but like having, whoever wants to come and do that and be with us and party with us, great. And we really aimed to be a very fashion forward club. And so NAAFA invited me when they were in San Francisco across the bridge to produce a fashion show at one of their conventions. And so I did that for them a couple of years. We went to Vegas the next year to do it there. And then about a year and a half after that, I think it was, they invited me to join the board. So I came onto the board in, what would that make that? I came onto the board in 2015. Is that right? I think that's right. And then I became the board chair in 2021. And then last year I was named the executive director. This is the first time we've had an executive director in about 20 years. Mm-hmm. So, it's a big sign of, reinvigorating the organization and also rebuilding infrastructure and just, aiming for longevity and all of that stuff.
Mm-hmm. It really feels like in the last couple of years that NAAFA has been killing it. But you're everywhere. You're just leading the way. And it just feels really, I'm so excited that you're at the helm.
Thank you. It's a different era for NAAFA in that, NAAFA's been many things to many people over its, 5.5 decade history. But it's one of the things it wasn't was intersectional. Mm-hmm. And so really have worked on that shift in the last few years, especially, but I would say, since I came onto the board, really trying to think about like, who are the fat folks who don't feel comfortable here and why don't they, or who don't feel interested in this and why don't they? And it's okay if, NAAFA doesn't have to be everybody's cup of tea, but everybody should feel welcome at the tea party. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, we've just been working really hard at that. And part of it is because I couldn't be part of an organization that wasn't trying harder than NAAFA had been trying to be intersectional.
Yeah.
For folks who are listening that don't know me, I am, I'm a Black woman with mixed race heritage, but a really strong Black identity. And I was, I was living in the Bay Area. I was doing diversity education. We just called it that at that time, but today people would call it DEI work, diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And I was doing that as my day job at a private school in the Bay Area. And I just had this life where and I was teaching women's studies. And so I was talking about gender issues all the time and race and in, some of my work as a DEI practitioner was during the Occupy movement. So we were talking about class a lot. So I was having these days that were steeped in talking about systemic injustice and identity. And then I wanted my fat rights work to also feel like that. And like I said, my club had been the nightclub event that I was doing had grown out of going to other plus size positive events, but not feeling as welcomed at those events as a Black woman with Black friends coming with me. Right. I'm, I'm light skinned. I have that privilege. There were some of those events. I was like, you're fine, but I didn't feel but I need everybody to be fine. Right. I need to be able to bring my other friends here with me and have us all have a good time in an environment that feels safe and welcoming. And so I was doing that work in other spaces. So when I was asked to join the board of NAAFA, I just knew NAAFA as this historic civil rights organization. It was I was super honored to be asked to join the board. And then I got there and it was well, how long do I want to do this if if these folks are not understanding, I'm having the same dynamic that I was having at the club.
Mm-hmm.
I had to start my own thing because the people at the other places were not, I wasn't using the word intersectional enough, but that's what it was, right? And so I had the same, it was the same experience at NAAFA. And luckily, as we started to make some shift, then we attract even more people who are committed to that. And we make sure that the folks that we are bringing on in leadership positions are committed to that, whatever their own personal identities are, that they are committed to intersectionality, that they are thinking about, centering the folks with the most, history of systemic disenfranchisement and so we are seeing a lot more. First of all, it's the first time, I think it's the first time in the history of the organization that we have an all fat board. And there's
what?
I mean, for the last in the era where I've been on the board.
Wow.
Right?
I just presumed that everyone was always fat on the NAAFA board.
No, because there's a long history of the involvement of allies and folks who identify with the term fat admirer.
Yeah, because it wasn't NAAFA started by Bill Fabry and Lou Louderback, who are two white, straight-sized men.
Yeah, Lou Louderback, I think, is a smaller fat guy, but Bill was a thin man and a very thin man then. I mean, Bill will tell you now. Bill Fabry, Bill is credited as the designated founder because he and Lou worked on the organization together. And in fact, they delayed the opening of the organization to work on some of the editing of what became Lou Louderback's book, Fat Power, which is kind of credited as being the first rights published book.
Yeah.
But so what happened is so here's the story, because I actually love this anecdote, and I think of Bill as a person who is, Bill has a strong identity as a fat admirer, and he is the person that people say he is credited with coining that phrase, fat admirer, versus some of the other euphemisms that were being used, like chubby chaser, and things like that. And he has a strong identity as a fat admirer. And I know that that's controversial for a lot of people, especially in fat liberation circles. Is that, is it admiration? Is it fetishizing? Is it what is, were they exploiting fat women? What does it all mean? In my experience with Bill, Bill is 81 years old, still actively trying to stay engaged in social media dialogues around fat rights and things like that. And he would say that technically now he's medically fat or whatever. We're going to talk a little bit, I think, about the flaws and how we label people as fat medically. But he was a young, thin engineer. He had some economic privilege. He's a white guy. He's the guy with cultural power when he starts this organization. But his wife is a fat Jewish woman who he adores. And it's just fun to I don't know, to me it's touching to listen to Bill talk about his wife and the other women he's had. Like Bill was not like a player. Like there are these ideas sometimes that like, you know, these guys started this organization so they could just get with a lot of fat ladies. And like there were guys who were attracted to the organization for that reason. That is not why Bill, and together with Lou and the handful of other people who founded NAAFA, that is not why. It wasn't started as a like, look for somebody to go on dates with and fuck. But like, but there was a period in NAAFA's history where there was like NAAFA Date, which was a sort of like a dating service to help people meet each other. And there was a lot of fat admirers hanging around. And some of them were just like, you know, like just gold star toxic masculinity dudes. Just coming terrible. But not all of them were. And I just like, it's always a weird position for me. It's like as a you know, a Black American woman to just be like, I want to talk about how great this white guy is. But I actually think Bill Fabry is his intentions were pure. And I know that he loved his wife, and he was seeing not just the way internalized anti-fatness was affecting her, but also the way systemic anti-fatness was affecting her. And he wanted to do something about that. He wanted to try to make cultural change for her and people like her. And the road to hell is often paved with good intentions. So along the way, was everything perfectly executed? No. And in fact, Bill will tell you he was part of the problem in terms of lack of intersectionality at NAAFA, because he thought the best thing to do was focus on one issue. So like, why would we be talking about race? That's not what we're experts in. We're experts in fact. And like, that sounds good, especially if you're only saying it to the other white people. If you're saying it to somebody who is having a daily experience of being, you know, racialized and then systemically discriminated against, maybe the why should we talk about race question has a different answer than it has for you. White men or white women who are experiencing anti-fatness as the primary area of your discrimination, right? So like, it's all a complicated history. But I think that you know, but the mix of people who were at that first meeting is some fat people and some thin people. It appears to be all white people. I mean, there could be some folks who are like white passing and have other identities or whatever, but like hearing the stories and seeing the photos, you know, the early days of NAAFA are pretty white. And you know your organization's white when you can kind of go like, oh, well, there was that one lady, I think she was Puerto Rican in like a year history, right? Like, okay, so you know, it's like NAAFA is a mixed bag across the board, but like I'm like across the years, right? And I'm sure it's a mixed bag to some people now. Like you are like, yay, Tigress's leadership, and I'm sure that there's somebody else out there who's like, what is this Black woman doing to our organization or whatever? So like, you know, this is what it is today, right? It's a Black-led organization. And not just led by a Black person, but by a Black person who also spent a large part of her professional life talking about race. Talking about class, talking about gender, talking about sexual orientation. And that is a different era. But also, there aren't any fat admirers or thin allies on our leadership team right now. And that doesn't mean that there's no space for for allies or people who are, you know, the sort of alternative terms we use in social justice, like accomplices or there's another one that people often use, agitators. Like there are these other A words that feel stronger than ally because ally's been so watered down and so misused by people who self-designate as allies. I still use allies because one of the things we try to do at NAAFA is reach folks who are not already steeped in social justice movement so that we can bring them along. And I mean, like, hopefully, I have no embarrassment saying, like, hopefully radicalize them around fat liberation. We are not the most radical space, right? Like, we are, you know, a somewhat moderate space. Like, we're radical compared to mainstream culture. Just the fact that we use the word fat is radical compared to mainstream culture, right? But in the fat liberation sort of ecosystem, right? I think So the folks at Fat Rose use the term ecosystem to talk about like where all the different fat organizations kind of go, in a constellation. I guess that's a mixed metaphor if I say ecosystem and constellation, but like I think of constellation as the term. But anyway, we're not the most radical organization, right? And the most radical people have organizations that are only even loosely called organizations because they're so non-hierarchical that it's just like a different kind of gathering or grouping or whatever. But but we want to be, and I like to think of us as like the gateway drug to fat liberation. And and in that space, if I just say like I want you to come in and be an accomplice, people don't understand what that means.
Yeah.
But if I say I want you to come in and be an ally, they understand what that means. And then while they are learning how to be an ally, they can learn how to be an accomplice, right? They can learn how to be a privileged traitor.
Yes.
But they don't come in there, right?
Yeah.
If that's where they're coming in, if you're coming in that hot, you're probably going to skip right over NAAFA to some other organization, and that's and that's fine.
So let's talk about our recent interaction. We saw each other in Seattle at the what was it called? FatCon. Thank you. Amazing conference, and I'm so pleased that I was there the day that you were there. Well, you were there for the whole weekend probably, but
I was there for the whole time. Yeah,
I was only there for a day anyway, and so we finally got to meet in person. And I ate some of your candy on your table, and you said, let's do a podcast episode together. And I was like, fuck yes. And you were you were the keynote, and I was on a panel that happens to be at the same time, but 10 minutes later. So I got the first 10 minutes of your talk. And I think I've seen maybe bits of it before because I went to see you talk at that you had told me about at you were doing a talk for legal professionals. And so I went and pretended to be a legal professional and listened to your talk.
Nice.
Anyway, you also told me about some tomfuckery that is happening recently, which boils my piss. And so we're going to talk about that today. So tell me, so what is this? What's going on? Tell me what's going on.
Before we get to the tomfuckery, let's just talk a little bit about FatCon, if that's okay with you, because I think like a lot of people have never been to a gathering of fat positive people. And it's so powerful. And like the FatCon in Seattle is just called FatCon. In Philadelphia, a few months before that, they had one called Philly FatCon. There have been fat gatherings. I mean, again, I'm going to say documented here because the way that we sort of look at the historical record and say what was the first of something is not always accurate to what humans were actually doing in ways that we don't acknowledge as like a formal organization. But I will just say like the first NAAFA conference was in 1970. And I think it was about 100 people at that first conference. And in the years after 1970, there are all these organizations. There are feminist collectives. There's No Lose, which started as the National Organization of Lesbians of Size and is now like a queer-centered, like pan-queer, queer-centered fat rights organization, fat activist organization. And No Lose had epic conferences for years that people who were at those, talk about how life-changing they were. There are these social events called BBW bashes. And again, like BBW is one of those terms that like some people are like, is that fetishizing? And then other people are like, I really identify with this term as, how I see myself. And whatever you feel about the terminology, those gatherings happen all over the country every year. And usually the biggest ones are the summer ones in Las Vegas, and they draw hundreds of fat people. There's a bash. There's an event called Bigger Vegas that's kind of like a gay men's equivalent of the BBW bashes, which actually might predate the BBW. Like Mirth and Girth, which is a gay men's organization, used to have these big annual gatherings. So like I hear some folks who are newer to fat lib world who were at FatCon talking about it as like, finally, now there's a convention for fat people. And like, now there's a convention for you as a fat person, but there's actually
Mm,
50 years history of conventions for fat people, right? And
mhm.
so but it's really, really powerful. And if you've never been to one and you have the opportunity, even a virtual gathering like this, like I was in a meeting with someone, we had a panel of folks who were going to be on our webinar to talk about the Nobody is Disposable Project, which is a collective of organizations and leaders who are working first in California, and then there were some folks in Canada working on in 2020, working on things like vaccine access for people in larger bodies, right?
Mhm.
And this really amazing collective. But one of the people who joined us for that panel was like, this is the first time in my life I've ever been in a gathering with only fat people.
Mm.
That was a virtual space with like 10 of us, right? So
Oh,
imagine how powerful that is in a virtual space and in a real life space when it's 100 people, when
yeah.
it's two people, when it's 500. I think the biggest, like bigger Vegas last year, the gay boy one, uh I think they sold out 3 hotels in Vegas.
Wow.
So
Yes.
like, so there are these, and like some of those were the other guys who just come because they want to, hit on the
Yeah.
fat guys, but like, but it's like still that still leaves hundreds of fat guys that together, right?
Yes.
Like, and FatCon didn't have any element of like, I mean, like, I'm sure there were folks enjoying each other's company in all the
Mm.
ways,
Oh, I
but
heard
like,
some stories.
I'm sure, but it didn't officially have any element of like this is a hookup spot for whatever.
Yeah.
It really was a fat liberation conference. It
And it
wasn't
felt
just
it felt
yeah,
so joyful, like just to be in the company of other fat people, and that maybe there's like one straight sized person, but pretty much everyone is fat, and it's just joy and excitement and giddiness and playfulness and just goodness all around.
hmm yeah. It had all these great workshops. It had I wasn't the there were I think there were 3 keynotes. Bob the not Bob the drag queen, the other one, world famous Bob,
Yeah.
and there was another keynote, and I'm blanking on who it is. I'm so sorry, whoever you were that I went to your thing. Why can I not think of it right now? Or was there another keynote, or was it just the fashion show was like the third everybody event? Whatever. There was a fashion show, there were keynotes, there were these amazing workshops, there was this great vendor fair, and it was running in sync with a fat burlesque festival that was happening produced by the same team. And so like there are all these different ways that you're right, like all these different ways to just celebrate fat joy. Like
Mhm.
there's all of this like just unapologetic spirit of fatness. And you could see performers, and you could see like it was just really, really fantastic. And it was really fantastic for me as somebody who's been to some of those other kinds of events. Like this wasn't
Mm.
my first rodeo when it comes to just being in a room with 100 fat people,
Yeah.
but it was a really, really well done event. And I loved seeing the love between that team and the Philly FatCon team, because that
Yeah.
could have just been like, oh, we doing our thing over here. Now y'all have to do a thing over there. There was
No.
none of the Seattle team went out to Philly for theirs. The Philly team came out to Seattle for that one. And
And
just
I
like,
I was I listened to a panel where they both talked about what it was like to run, and at the end,
mhm,
the Philly FatCon people were saying, "Listen, if you want to go do a FatCon in your city,
yep,
come hit us up, and we'll help you organize FatCon wherever. We're not owning the name; just go do it."
yeah,
I thought it was really
exactly.
nice.
Exactly. And Puck's the sort of person who FatCon in Seattle was their brainchild.
Yeah.
Um Same thing at the closing ceremony of the Seattle one. So like I love that. I love that kind of like, mutual community support. Like we don't
Yeah.
like that's one of the things that when I was a nightclub promoter, before I started my party, I took the people who ran the 2 other plus size parties in the Bay Area. I took them out to dinner to talk about like how I want to do this in like a mutually supportive way. Like I'm going to do my party on Friday nights, so it's never going to interfere with your Saturday night party. How can we support each other? We need more options for plus size people not to be fighting with each other. But
Yeah.
they were fighting with each other so bad, I couldn't have that dinner with them together.
Oh
I
no.
had to take the one couple out and the other guy out separately because they would not sit there.
Oh.
And
Oh.
so and then whatever, nightlife is not necessarily a space where the politics of like community support are at the forefront, right? So I
Yeah.
was doing things a little bit differently. And like I had, I will sometimes talk about like I had a mission and value statement as a nightclub party. Like
Yeah,
a lot of
that's
that's
weird.
not
That's weird.
right? So, but I love seeing that too with the teams that were producing those two events. And I think we are going to see a lot more of them, and the same thing is true with like, I've seen that with a lot of the folks who plan clothing swaps. Like, what do you want to learn from me about how to plan a clothing swap where you are? The pool parties and stuff. Like there's this idea too. This is another one of those sort of know your history places where like there's this idea that like pool parties started when we all saw it on Shrill. And like,
oh yeah,
popular when we all saw it on Shrill. But that party to me looked like everything I'd ever seen about S.E. Golden's Golden Confidence pool parties, which had been happening for years before that. And also there have been pool parties at bashes and NAAFA conventions and NOLUs for decades. Like, so the pool party is not a new thing, but it is growing differently and spreading differently right now. And some of that is because it got like people got inspired by that scene in Shrill. But also like, part of the reason it can be successful is that there are folks who've done a good one who are willing to say, here's how we made it good. And there are folks who've done, tried to do one and it didn't turn out so well, who are willing to say, here's what we wish we had known. And when we share knowledge and community like that, then we all get better. Like we have more things. There's not enough fat friendly stuff in the world for us to be fighting with each other about, about like the competition should all be like Crystal from the Big Sexy Chat. There's a way she always says it, like I don't have competitors, I have compatriots or something like that. She's got a she says it. Y'all should also listen to the Big Sexy Chat podcast because that's another really great. We've got so many podcasts in our community.
We do.
So many. I just started really, really listening to podcasts last year, and there was a there was a point where I was just like, I was listening like 20 hours a week of podcasts and still feeling like I can't get to all the cool fat ones.
No, we're so lucky. We're so lucky.
We're so lucky.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I know you wanted to get to the stuff we hate, but I just wanted to have that moment of fat joy because it was like the fat con.
Yeah. And that's a good reminder for people. Like, I'm lucky. I'm in Vancouver. We have fat pool parties. We have fat gatherings. We have fat clothing swaps. I'm lucky in Vancouver. But if you are in a city that doesn't have any of that, why not do it yourself? Why not do a pool party and invite some fatties, or, ask other people how they've, exactly like what you just said, Tigress, how they've seen success doing this thing, or even doing a fat con. Oh, amazing.
Because that's the thing is like, if you've got the interest, you've got the passion, you've got some of the skills, and you can assemble a team of people who have the skills, you can do a fat con. Right. You can definitely do a clothing swap. You can definitely do a meetup, a picnic in the park. You can definitely do a pool party. I mean, some of those things, including the conventions, we need to be thinking more about the sort of like, are we being consistent with masking? Are we making sure it's a safe environment for folks? Like there's, there's a lot of passion. There's a lot of excitement for us to gather in person. And there's also a lot of passion from folks who cannot gather in person because of their own health needs, because of their beliefs about community support around health, like whatever, who are just not going to come to in-person things unless they are fully masked. And there are going to be people who are not going to come to in-person things even if they are fully masked. And especially in fat community where travel is such a travesty for so many of us in so many ways. Getting to an event, even when it's in your own location, is hard enough. Getting to one that's in another part of the country is really hard. So it's really important, I think, for us to continue to do virtual events. And it's really important for all of the organizers who are creating these events to think about community safety and to think about accessibility and to think about the fat disabled people who want to come to these events, and like all of that accessibility stuff in as many of the ways as we can hold. And also for us to still do virtual events. And this is why NAAFA has continued to really invest in our webinar program or our virtual event program. We have
Mm.
a classic webinar series where it's kind of like this, like I just get to talk to cool fat people who are doing great stuff. Like we have one coming up with Jeff Jenkins from the National Geographic show Never Say Never. We have one coming up with Jessica Wilson, who wrote a book about Black women's narratives about our bodies. Like we have, we're gonna have Grief Cat, who performed at FatCon, doing some stuff at one of our virtual events, and we have like a virtual BYO brunch, brunch series. Just have fat entertainers, and we have this really cool brunch team that we have a lot of virtual stuff, because no matter how much we work really hard to make in-person stuff accessible, there are some people who just like travel is prohibitive for whatever reason, or gathering together is prohibitive, and we had all this great virtual bonding over at what we thought of as the height of the pandemic. And then a lot of places just abandoned it as soon as we could be together in person, or as soon as some people felt we could be together in person. So like, I just like, oh no, I'm on my soapbox about that a little bit, but I do want us, as I think a lot about it in our event planning at NAAFA, like where are the thresholds of like, we can't do it unless we do it this way.
Yeah.
Do we, have add a virtual track? I love the hybrid events that are having a thing in person and a virtual track, like the International Weight Stigma Conference last year. Had a virtual track, and so and will again this year, and so you can hear from like these researchers and scholars, and increasingly more just fat liberationists at that conference. And you can do it. You don't have to go to Colchester, England to do it. You could do it from live, because the virtual track is available. So like, I want us to be thinking about those accessibility things a lot as we think about how we build community and who gets included and who gets left out. And we're not going to get it perfect all the time, and we're not going to please everybody, but it should always be at the forefront of our thinking about it. So
yeah, absolutely.
I don't know how I tangented myself into that. You about the tomfuckery now.
So tomfuckery
Yes.
is right to O-word care. And they've come up with the O-word Bill of Rights. And like a trigger warning, we're probably going to slip and say the O-words. So just like a heads up on that. So what is going on? What's the crack? What's happening?
So, I mean, what's happening is Big Pharma is orchestrating a plan to gain public support for, in theory, weight stigma prevention, but in reality, political power to try to convince the US government in particular, but also other governments around the world, to include weight loss drugs and other procedures in whatever their national insurance programs are. So here in the US, they're trying to get these drugs covered by Medicare. And they're trying to get these drugs covered by Medicare because that would give a huge amount of access to many, many people who can't afford the drugs at their list price now. And we're talking about the GLP-1 agonist drugs, people know it as Ozempic. Ozempic is actually a diabetes drug, and Wegovy, which is the same drug as Ozempic essentially, but is approved at a higher dose specifically for the purpose of weight loss, is actually the weight loss drug. But I feel like that horse is out of the barn. People just know it as Ozempic. They're going to call every pharmaceutical company's drug Ozempic. They're going to call, it's like Kleenex, right? Like what it's called now, but it's not actually what it's, but anyway, if you can get when you read articles or headlines, because let's face it, some of us only read the headlines sometimes, about how many billions and billions of dollars Ozempic is going to make in the next 5 to 7 years. Part of that calculation is based on the idea that national healthcare systems, the NHS in Britain and Medicare in the US, will be covering the drug. And that not only will that open up that market, it will also force private insurance companies to have to cover the drug. And so then you've got everybody's insurance covering the drugs. Right now, there's a limited amount of weight loss procedure, pharmaceuticals, therapy, whatever, that are covered by most insurance programs, if any. Your insurance might not cover anything at all related to weight loss. And Yeah, and just as Vinny warned that like I probably will use the O words here in the context of protesting these things, right? I always tell
Mm.
people that there are three situations in which I will use the O words. One is to talk about the rapper Heavy D, who called himself the overweight lover and who is iconic and amazing, and we should talk more. So I will use I will use overweight lovers in the house to talk about Heavy D. I will use the word obesity in terms of like a sort of middle fingers up to the concept of glorifying obesity and then actually glorifying myself as a labeled as obese person. So I will use it in that context, and then I will use it in critique of the systems that have medicalized body size and use it as the disease label. So in a
Mm.
conversation like this, like I'm not going to use it to talk about myself. I'm not going to be like, as a person living with obesity, blah blah blah, right?
Mm.
Um, but in the context of talking about these, I'm just going to say it. And also, I just want to be clear that in the context of talking about the coverage of weight loss, anything that's kind of labeled weight management, which we would actually activists, fat advocates would actually call that weight cycling, not weight management.
Mm-hmm.
But the medical industrial complex calls it weight management. I'm going to use that term as we talk about it a little bit, but just note our protest of that term.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, when we talk about weight management possibilities, or at least the things that are presented to us as weight management possibilities, it is for me as a fat liberationist and for me as the person, guiding NAAFA, we hold the fat liberationist belief in body autonomy, which means everybody has the right to make the decision to pursue weight loss if they choose to in their body. And we're not trying to prevent you, like not trying to automatically prevent anyone from pursuing intentional weight loss. What we are trying to do is make sure that you are doing that with truly informed consent, and your consent is not informed if most of the things you are being told about what obesity is as a disease are are presented to you at the orchestration of people who benefit from selling you things to treat that disease. So um so like these so-called weight loss drugs, right? Or these, yeah, they make people lose weight, so they are weight loss drugs. That is accurate. um and and other kinds of drugs being abused as weight loss drugs. um but they're like the presentation of them as a solution to all your health problems without adequately presenting to almost any of you the potential complications to your health problems that are caused by them is part of the problem. And so so back to the Right to Obesity Care organization. This is an umbrella organization that is led by the National Consumer Alliance and the National Council on Aging here in the US. And they launched earlier this week an obesity bill of rights. So, folks might be familiar with the concept of a patient's bill of rights, which is like a list of like, this is how your doctor should not engage in tomfuckery when they are dealing with your health, basically. You deserve to be treated with respect. You deserve to be given appropriate information to make the decisions that you need to make about your health. You deserve to, have coverage of the procedures that you need, to have a say in what procedures are being done to you. Like it's that kind of stuff, right? And I think the first Patient's Bill of Rights came out in the 70s. And then there are all of these sort of like, you know, similarly structured kind of bills of rights. NAAFA had a healthcare bill of rights. I actually probably will put it up on our website again in the wake of all this nonsense, just as evidence that like we cared about this because we've always cared about fat people. We didn't just care about what we recognize that fat people are an even bigger market than we thought they were, right?
I
But
think you already have it on the website because I've seen it. It was from like 2017, right?
yeah, the original version was actually from 2008.
Ah.
And I haven't been able to find whether we had a version before 2008. But so I know it goes back to at least 2008 with us. And then it was updated in 2017. And I think, our board together will give it a 2024 refresh soon, because what's complicated about the Obesity Bill of Rights that this coalition has released is, well, first of all, the framing of it is just a lie, because they are framing it as like a grassroots effort from people in our communities who want to take better care of their friends and loved ones who are living with the disease of obesity, living with the complicated chronic disease of obesity.
Yeah,
That's the way that
lifelong, yeah, recurring
you gotta
disease.
get that chronic in there. Yeah, you
Yeah,
gotta
chronic.
get chronic in there. So that's how they would say it. It is not a grassroots anything. Nothing that is sponsored, like we don't even call our roots grass work. And like NAAFA has a long history. And I'm really proud of the reach that we do have as an organization that has very limited resources. But fat liberation work, including NAAFA's work, is some of the most underfunded social justice work in the world. And we have an annual budget that is like pennies on the thousands compared to these obesity advocacy organizations. Hi, like if you're only listening and not watching this on YouTube, like I'm over here doing all the air quotes about these organizations calling themselves advocates. They're advocating for something, but what they're advocating for is a little different than what they tell us they're advocating for. And so like we don't refer to our work as grassroots. So how is a coalition that is supported by 35 organizations, including major health organizations, the American Academy of Dietetics and Nutrition, the National Council on Aging and the National Consumer Council are the ones that made it, and major obesity quote unquote advocacy organizations that are funded by pharmaceutical companies, and the two biggest commercial diet companies in the world, Weight Watchers and Noom, have signed on to this obesity bill of rights. How in all of the F's, how in all the F's in every alphabet that exists, is that a grassroots coalition? There are billions and billions and billions of dollars available to that coalition. And certainly there are millions in action. The National Council on Aging, who does great work around other elder care things, is like Novo Nordisk is one of their main funders. You could like this is publicly available. Like you look at their annual report and see that Novo Nordisk is one of their main funders.
Why is that? What's the connection that Novo Nordisk is making with aging? Are they just like, there's fat old people, let's get them too?
This is what's funny about that. So for folks who don't know, Novo Nordisk is the manufacturer of Ozempic and Wegovy. So there are other pharmaceutical companies involved in this like arms race for who makes the most money off of fat people. Most notably probably is Eli Lilly, which does which is also developing their own
Mounjaro and tirzepatide.
Yeah, they have their whole own arm of doing this same kind of thing. So like Novo Nordisk is McDonald's, Eli Lilly is at Burger King, Abbott is one of the major funders of the American Academy of Dietetics, and Abbott is, as far as I can see, not making a drug right now, but they make some other like diabetes management stuff that they're like, hey, if you're using that drug, it works even better if you use it along with our diabetes.
Yeah.
So like there's money in it for all of these like manufacturers of pharmaceuticals and other kind of medical aids, right? And the reason that they are particularly focused on elders right now is because elders as a cultural group do not always have power in this country, but elders as a political group, as a voting group, that's a big deal. And if what you're trying to do is get states and ultimately the federal government to mandate that Medicare cover these drugs or that private insurance cover these drugs, one of the best ways to do that is to get the people who are politically engaged and will throw their weight around, so to speak, and will throw their age around in terms of politics to create public support for that happening. If you have a bunch of demand from elders on Medicare that why isn't my Medicare covering this? Why isn't my Medicare covering this? That's actually a really important political voice. Like, does it just automatically happen magically? No. You also have to dump a bunch of money directly on politicians and you have to get a bunch of state level people to buy in. There are states all over the US that have introduced legislation that is either to, get their state healthcare system to cover these drugs, sometimes in conjunction with other procedures, sometimes just pitched as like diabetes management, even when you're taking it exclusively for the weight loss part, not for the diabetes part. But like there's a variety of strategies here, but part of the bottom line is that like there's a variety of strategies here, and when you scratch the surface of any of them, Novo Nordisk is behind the funding of many of them.
Right.
So they're presented as grassroots strategies. They're presented as grassroots strategies, and they're increasingly presented as grassroots strategies that not only protect elders, but also protect Black and Brown communities, because denying obesity care to poor Black and Brown people is a form of systemic racism, according to these people. So, denying, like, they don't have a framework like we have, which is, our framework is anti-fatness is creating some of the health crises that we see in poor communities, Black and Brown, like economically disadvantaged communities, Black and Brown communities, like rural communities. Like, some of the anti-fatness is part of that crisis. It's not the fat itself.
Yeah.
It's the way we interact with fat people. But what these organizations argue is, yes, we agree with you. It's the way we interact with fat people. We need to be much nicer and more respectful to fat people. But our goal is, please be nice and respectful to me because you should be nice and respectful to me.
Mm-hmm.
And their goal is, please be nice and respectful to the fat people because otherwise we will scare them away from our expensive treatments.
Yeah.
We got to get them into the medical office so that we can get the money. And it's not, we don't even have to get their money anymore if we can get their insurance company's money.
It just makes me so fucking mad that Novo and Eli Lilly and anyone that's peddling weight loss, that they've glommed onto social justice movements because they know people are getting smart to their bullshit, and so they're like, how can we confuse them? And so how is someone going to say, so you're denying it to these poor Black communities, to these older fat people? You're an evil person by denying them the care that they want and they deserve. And so how is someone going to argue that and say, I'm not racist, I'm not, they'll just go along with it because they think it's a good idea.
Well, and it's working, right? They're gaining traction with these arguments. I mean, they've been doing a sort of weight stigma awareness campaign. The major obesity advocacy, again, in quotation marks, organizations have been doing weight stigma awareness for at least 5 years now in really obvious ways, and from before that, because they want fat patients, clients, customers, whatever, to see them as their advocates. We are doing this for you because we care about you. The Obesity Action Coalition, which gets almost all of its funding from a combination of diet pharma companies, or pharma companies that make diet drugs. Novo Nordisk doesn't only make Ozempic. They also they're also like, that's where you get your insulin from. So need this company. We can't just burn down Novo Nordisk, at least not until we have some alternatives to some of the other things that they, and like, people need Ozempic. People need Ozempic for diabetes care. It is effective in that way. But like Reagan Chastain points out that, like, the way we get to these drugs for weight loss specifically is that we develop the drugs for diabetes and, like, oh my God, there's a side effect of this where people are losing weight. How can we exploit that? Right? Like, from my perspective, it is, how can we exploit that? From the pharma company's perspective, they would say, how can we develop this important tool to help our customers with their health? Okay. I mean, and if you believe that, great. Like, companies are companies. Their bottom line is the bottom line. Your health is not the bottom line. The pharmaceutical companies have shown over and over again, they'll kill all the fat people if there's money to be made on the way to that. And everybody else too, right? Like, there's a lot of, if you know anything about sort of the pharmaceutical company playbook related to what led to the opioid crisis, it's a similar playbook, right?
Yes.
You court the doctors, you help them better understand that this is a complicated chronic disease. They shouldn't be judging their patients for being fat. They should be prescribing things to them for being fat.
I've said to someone, I was saying, like, in 20 years or 30 years, there's going to be a whole documentary series, movies about this, being like, I can't believe they got away with it. It's so scandalous. Like that one that was on Disney. I can't remember what it was.
There are two. So I was sick in December, and while I was supposed to be resting, I made it was a genius move on one hand, but it was sure depressing. There are two miniseries. They're not documentaries, they're miniseries. So there's some fictional them. But one is called Dope Sick, and it's on
Dope Sick.
Yeah, and it's available on Hulu. And then the other one is called Painkiller. It's available on Netflix. And those two documentaries explore various aspects of how the opioid epidemic was created. And part of what happens is those drug companies work really hard to get people to think about pain differently. So they will think about prescribing for pain differently. Yeah. That is the exact parallel of getting people to think about obesity as a disease versus as just a physical characteristic. And when we talk about, like, when we look at the obesity numbers, we don't question enough about them. And we don't, first of all, we should question the designation of obesity as a disease. It is untrue for people to argue that there is no opposition to that designation. There is opposition. There has always been opposition within the medical community, within the scientific community, about whether or not it was ever appropriate to classify obesity as a disease in the first place. But it's well classified. Like, one of my favorite things to tell audiences is, like, the American Medical Association did that. They had a committee study whether to do that for, like, I think a year. And the committee said, no, we don't think we should classify obesity as a disease. And then the American Medical Association said, well, we do. We're going to do it anyway. Right?
Right. They're like, peace. We're doing it. Bye.
Basically, whatever. By that point, the National Institutes of Health were already calling it that. Like, the CDC calls it that. The World Health Organization calls it that. Like, everybody now in these systems, the organizations call it a disease. But it is false to believe that there are not people within the system and within those very organizations who think that that classification is wrong.
Yeah. And you know what it's given me? It's given me, I made a video recently, because I do also DEI work. So I've made a video recently about, in Canada, it's been a year since conversion therapy has been banned. Yay, Canada. But it's giving me, pray the gay away, that giving me queerness is a disease, queerness is a choice, queerness is a problem. It's not your fault that you're queer, but here we've got some solutions to make you not queer.
We're going to have compassion for you as you struggle with that thing.
Yeah. Like,
so that we can then treat you and cure you of that thing. In the case of obesity, no one actually wants to cure obesity. The money is in chronic care for obesity, as it is in many other things that are actual diseases, or I don't know what other things are labeled diseases that there's, like, a major, voice of dissent about that, because I just I know that historically about things like, homosexuality being in the, what is the psychology book
DSM?
DSM. Yeah. I know things like that historically, but, like, in a contemporary way, I don't know what else is out there that people are like, that should not be labeled a disease in the first place.
Yeah.
What I would say is, like, when we're resistant to having fatness labeled as a disease and then called obesity, when we're resistant to that, I don't ever want us to be, like, reinforcing that there's something stigmatizing about having a disease. People have diseases. They do not deserve to be stigmatized for having the disease. The stigma is in having a disease made up and manipulated about you just for the purpose of profits, or because people's underlying anti-fatness is what has convinced them it's a disease, not actual science, right?
Yeah.
We're science. I tell people this all the time. Like, fat liberationists get accused of being science deniers. We're not science deniers.
No, I feel like we're the opposite.
We want you to look at all the science, right? Like, we want you to all the science. We want you to fund more science. I was looking at something last night. What was I looking at? I was looking at something, and it was about the idea of the obesity paradox, which is, like, the obesity paradox is, like, for people who have heart failure, like, there's a higher risk up to a certain weight, but after that weight, those people actually are more likely to survive even though they are higher BMI. That's kind of what the obesity paradox is. And so I was looking at this research about, and like I'm a layperson, but I'm not a researcher, I'm not a scientist, I'm a layperson reading this. But I'm looking at this research about whether the obesity paradox is real, or whether when you just it has more to do with the body composition of people in that higher weight category. And that if you have, the hip to height ratio or the waist to height ratio or whatever, if you look at it like that instead of just as BMI, that it proves that obesity is still dangerous, right? And then like the problem with that whole argument is, but obesity is diagnosed by BMI. So you're seeing, your research is showing that BMI is not the determining factor in whether or not heart failure is more common in larger bodied or higher weight people, that BMI is not the determining factor. But then you're using a disease that is diagnosed by BMI to say that people with that disease go in this category of, like, you're saying obesity is risky as a disease because these people who our research just showed BMI is not the factor in why they are, like, it was all convoluted. And
there's like, so many contradictions in the science, right? That people were like, I did some research on the research. I did a literature review on fatness and youth in Canada. And they were like, the research was like, fat kids are doing okay and diets don't work. So the solution is we should put fat kids on diets. And I'm just like, what?
All the time, right?
Why?
All the time. And like, it's like the American Medical Association last year was like, BMI is terrible. We finally admit it. It's kind of racist. It's really problematic. And also, it's the best tool we have available. So we're going to keep using it. Well, we also try to develop some other tools to designate even more people as fat.
Yeah, it's just like cognitive dissonance much. Like, what is going on?
It really is. So, like, but also what was key in this report I was reading last night was like, the head researcher just said, we saw those numbers and we knew that couldn't be true because we know obesity is bad.
Yeah. Okay, well, if
you didn't go in with a research question. It wasn't, is obesity bad?
Yeah.
It wasn't, obesity dangerous? Is it true that obesity is a higher risk, causes a higher risk of heart failure? You didn't go into your research with that question. You went into your research with a statement. Obesity, and so we have to figure out how this research that showed that it wasn't bad is wrong, because we already know it's bad categorically across, period.
Yes, that's confirmation bias, right?
Confirmation bias, but it's openly stated confirmation bias. Like, it's just openly stated as a goal of the research.
Yeah.
And then there's no like questioning of that. So, and to get us back to the obesity Bill of Rights, there's no questioning of conflict of interest when Noom shows up to say, yeah, that's right, we believe in the obesity Bill of Rights. Well, the obesity Bill of Rights has some really good stuff in it. You know what we do want? We do want MRI machines that are big enough for the biggest people. We do want that. You know what we do want? We do want your doctor to treat you with respect and care regardless of your body size.
Yeah.
So I think there are 4 points in it that I'm like, yeah, I agree with this. But you framed this as obesity care, not care for hhigher weight patients.
Yeah. That's the thing, is
how we care for all the fat people. You frame this as how we care for all the people who are designated as being living with the disease of obesity, and then you've categorized everyone under that definition based on their body size.
Yeah. That's why I think it's so tricky, is because they sandwich it between things which are absolutely desirable and reasonable, and then they put in
grassroots campaign has a multi-million-dollar marketing firm behind it. So they're smart enough to do it that way.
Yeah. And that's what it really, really makes me frightened, because as I'm doing this, the consulting I do in diversity, equity, and inclusion, that bullshit is seeping into other people who, I don't know if they should know better, but I've seen other DEI consultants say, oh, well, fatness is disease and we should let fat people have access to this stuff, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, Dude, you're literally just parroting pharmaceutical companies' talking points, and they can't see it because they've done such a good job of tricking people into thinking it's about social justice.
Yeah. And because they've done such a good job of, being the puppet masters behind the scenes for much of this time. So like even now, like Novo Nordisk is not one of the organizations that has signed on to the Obesity Bill of Rights. They haven't signed on. But they fund the National Council on Aging. They fund they fund the Obesity Action Coalition. I think they fund the Obesity Society. Like, so you don't have to show up as yourself. You don't have to show up. You don't even have to show up as a wolf in sheep's clothing. You just hired some chickens to like, you're not the wolf. You don't even have to be the wolf in the hen house. You just hire a bunch of chickens to go into the hen house for you.
Yeah.
And then everybody is looking like, isn't that I guess I combined, I'm mixing metaphors again. I combined all the barnyard animals together, sheeps and chickens and wolves and whatever. But like the thing is like, oh, it's a fox in the hen house and it's a wolf in sheep's clothing. I got it. But the bottom line is still they're the foxes and wolves. And this is not Zootopia where the fox is actually like secretly a good guy and we've just misstereotyped him. They are like, it's bad. They're the bad ones, right? Yeah. And I have no doubt that there are good people in those systems who genuinely believe that they are doing God's work in improving people's health. I have no doubt some of those people would change their minds if they knew more of what we know. Yeah. And some of them would, but either because they still believe it's the right way or because of their own internalized bias or because of the check that they're getting from Novo Nordisk. And this is the thing about conflicts of interest. Medical organizations do not include you working with a pharmaceutical company as about obesity as a conflict of interest when you are doing things about obesity. It regularly happens that you will see these reports where there's a disclosure of conflict of interest statements, and there's no mention of the fact that many people who worked on the report actually get funding from a pharmaceutical company. Yeah. It is people, people like Reagan and other people who like do that kind of research on behalf of fat advocacy communities that go and find that out. Yeah. Like, it's not like the National Council of Aging was like, by the way, we get a bunch of money from Novo Nordisk, so of course we think these diet drugs should be covered by Medicare. I had to look at their annual report to see that they get money from Novo. Yeah. What layperson, person who is not, spending, 60 hours a week as the director of an organization about fat advocacy is looking at the annual reports of other organizations to get money from pharma.
And what about because see, it was the aging company and then also the National Consumer League. What about that?
I didn't dig into their financials, but I mean, the National Consumer League, you have business interests involved in this coalition through Noom and Weight Watch. Yeah. I don't know. I haven't thought about that one as deeply. I've thought more about the aging stuff just because to me, part of what's ridiculous to me about the aging stuff is like, y'all are the same people who were trying to convince us that there were no fat old people because everybody's going to die before they get old. Exactly. The same people who say stuff like, you've never seen a bunch of old fat people because there aren't that many of them. Like you are the same. I mean, I'm not saying that the National Council of Aging or even Novo Nordisk literally said that, but the specter of early death is one of the most motivating things for people, even people who have fat liberationist beliefs, when it comes to fearing for their health because of the things that they are told are the only possibilities in a larger body. Mm-hmm. The specter is always there, from the trolls on the internet who tell you you're going to die by 30. Hi, I'm 49. But if I die tomorrow, they're going to be like, Tigress died so tragically young, and it's all because she was fat, right? Yeah. And like, so these are still like, this is a narrative that you used to not care. So, and then they said in their press release or one of the articles that I read, they were like, we did this grassroots research because they had these, like, I think they called them town halls that they claim they had all over the country, but it looks like they had 4 of them. It's a much bigger country than 4 town halls for your grassroots movement. But, where they talk to elders, and elders reported to them that they feel isolated and overlooked in obesity care. Well, first of all, they feel isolated and overlooked in a lot of healthcare ways. And you're focusing, but you don't have $1 million of funding from those other issues, so you're not talking to them about that.
Yeah.
First of all, that. Second of all, of course, they feel isolated because you focused all your stuff on obesity care on the people that you thought you could make the most money off of. So until you decided you wanted to go after Medicare, you weren't thinking about them. And when you're thinking about who you can make the most money off of, and you're building a narrative that this is a chronic illness that will need treatment for the rest of your life, you want to get those 20 and 30-year-olds because you got 30 years of money to make off of them. Right? The 60-year-old, do you have 30 years of money to make off them? And based on the narratives you've been upholding, no, you don't have any years of money off them if they're 60 and fat, right? You've been telling yourself that and telling us that. But now, the ripple effects of getting to treat them for 2 or 3 years, but getting to treat them through Medicare means that all the other systems have to fall in line with what Medicare is doing. So you can get that 20 or 30-year-old from that poor Black community that you did not care about any other time. But now that you think you can get insurance to pay for what they couldn't pay for out of pocket, all of a sudden you care about them.
Yeah.
So it's like, who do you believe, right? Like I tell people all the time, I have this, like, it feels kind of silly, but like I often use this like fried chicken analogy where like if the leading medical associations were telling you like fried chicken is the healthiest thing that you could eat, it will change your life, it will create longevity, reduce the risk of strokes, it'll do all of these things, right? And you were like, that seems interesting. Okay. And then you found out that those organizations got all their funding from KFC. You might have some questions about that, right? Yes. You might be like, well, why is Colonel Sanders donating $8 billion to the American Medical Association, right? You might have some. But when it comes to like pharmaceuticals and obesity, and the same thing is for the weight loss surgeons, the same thing is for the other kinds of treatment programs, commercial and medical treatment programs, you just get to say you're an obesity expert. Like you just get to be Colonel Sanders being like, well, of course I know the most about fried chicken. I'm a fried chicken expert.
Yeah.
And somebody goes like, but don't you have a conflict of interest here? No, I'm a fried chicken expert, right? Yeah. That's how it works with like, quote unquote, obesity experts, is that, they just get to say like, well, I've been spending 20 years helping people fail at weight loss. Therefore, I'm an obesity expert.
Right? I see some of these organizations, they say, oh, we've been around since the 80s. And I'm like, you've been doing a really shit job because fat people still exist.
What I love is like, why is the obesity epidemic still spreading when we're putting so much work into it? Because we're putting dumbass work into it.
Yeah.
First of all, also it's spreading because y'all keep changing the numbers of where people get designated as obese. So you're going to add millions of people if you drop the BMI cutoff for what obesity is. Okay, so first of all that. But then, but human bodies are changing. We're also, as a species, taller than we were 300 years ago. But we're not like, oh, the height crisis, it's killing everybody.
Yeah.
I don't, because we don't have a long-standing cultural narrative that height is people's own fault. So we don't have a way to shame people into spending money trying to reduce their height. We do have ways to shame people into increasing their height. Like we have things that we do to, we have narratives and medical narratives for little people to go undergo dramatic surgeries for leg lengthening. Like we have that parallel that exists, but like, but even that, it's not like there are, there aren't 93 million little people in the United States. So the market is different for, and even sort of like non-little people, short stature folks, like just your friend who's a little bit short. Like the numbers we don't count that the same way. We don't categorize it the same way. We don't label it as disease the same way. So it's not a market in the same way.
Yeah. Talking about height, I noticed so NAAFA had a press release which was in response to this obesity Bill of Rights. And in it, you mention height as well as weight and how we shouldn't be stigmatizing either. Why is height pulled in? Is it because for legal grounds it's easier to bring height into, or is it because the height weight ratio for the BMI, or is there some other connection there that I'm not making?
It's all of that stuff, actually. So we first of all, like, perceptions of being fat can be related to your height.
Yes.
So like, so when we say size discrimination, we are not always talking just about literally weight discrimination. We're sometimes talking about body shape discrimination or perceptions of fat, or like acceptable amount of body tone. Like there's all these different things that we can mean when we're saying, like, your employer might be treating you unfairly because of your body size. It's not necessarily that they're putting you on a scale and treating you unfairly. It's they're looking at you and thinking a thing about your body. And sometimes the combination of weight and height is really important to understanding that bias. But also, there are ways in which, especially around physical access discrimination, right? Around people needing accessibility. Height is like a legit reason why you might need reasonable accommodations in your workplace, in your school, in your, whatever. And height in both directions, actually. If you're the super tall kid, and you need something at your school, you're probably going to get it, because nobody's going to be like, well, this tall kid could just go on a diet and get shorter, right? So you're probably going to get it, right? But if you didn't get it, you would need some kind of recourse for, like, okay, there's this whatever, these attached desks at my school are impossible for me because my legs can't fold up under that because I'm too tall. So they should get a different chair for me. I shouldn't have to bring my own chair, right? So there are ways that height, both for very tall people and for very short people, and again, not just for people who are actually dwarves, right? Who are actually little people. And we're getting to know the LPA, Little People of America, and one of the things I know is, like, people sometimes hear dwarves and they don't like, they think I should be saying people with dwarfism. They have the same debates in their community about that kind of first as we have. So often I just mix it up in acknowledgement that they have those debates. But anyway, like, short stature people who actually have dwarfism have some protections under the Americans with Disabilities Act in the United States. Because that is an actual medical and physical condition. Like, the dwarfism is actually, like, that's a real thing, not a made up thing that they just applied to all the short people. Like, obesity is this thing they apply to all the fat people. And so, like, it's complicated around that community in particular, because they do have some legal protections that just sort of a person who is less than average height does not have. They don't qualify for. If you're 5 feet tall but you don't have dwarfism, you don't qualify for the ADA, and if you needed to action around something. But so anyway, the height piece is important both in terms of perceptions of body size, like perceptions of fatness based on, if you weigh this and you're 6 feet tall, that's different than if you weigh this and you're 5.5 feet tall, right?
Yeah.
It is also, like, body size discrimination is about all the body sizes.
Yeah.
And even in that, we know that there are ways that culturally tall people are preferenced, but in terms of access things, like, if you had to drive a company car and you were very tall, could you just not get that promotion because they don't have a car that you fit or whatever? Like, it's all still relevant, and we still want to be in solidarity. And the pushback is always about the fat people. Nobody ever shows up to testify against this bill because if tall people don't like the way the world treats them, they should just stay home. That's never where people get pissed. We're never going to see, like, Fox News reports about the tall guy who asked to sit in the exit row on the plane to get some extra leg room. Like, we're never going to see that, right? And the ire is always directed at the fat people because it is always so, like, you should just change instead of the system changing for you.
Yeah.
So it is like, we do have to have solidarity with people who are facing body size discrimination in other ways. And we do have to acknowledge that the fire around it is always getting almost always getting directed at the fat people.
Yeah, exactly.
When it comes to legislation stuff, especially.
So with all of this bullshit that's going on, I just feel anxious about it, because I just don't want them to win. It just so. Do you have any advice for people to protect themselves from messaging from the anti-fat wolves in sheep clothing people, or any hope on the horizon? Because you're talking to media outlets, and you've mentioned that there are some media outlets who are friendly to fat liberation versus let's kill all the fat people.
Who are friendly to liberation, or who are just at least professionally committed to their both sidesism going in both ways as journalists. One of the things we see a lot from the media is, if anybody talks about fat rights, fat liberation, fat activism, even just fat people are human, then somebody has to be interviewed to talk about how terrible obesity is. We don't, there's no parity there, right? There's no every time we run an article about how terrible obesity is, we need to talk to a fat activist who questions this paradigm. There's not that. That's not a journalistic standard that exists across the industry, across the media. But there are journalists who, care about exploring many sides of the issue, who are always going to look for a voice from fat activism because they know fat activism exists. We are outnumbered and outgunned when it comes to, we are outnumbered and outgunned if we only had to go against one of these organizations.
Yeah.
Because these organizations have budgets in the millions and we don't. And even the Obesity Action Coalition, which is the one I know best, is they will talk all the time about how we're an all volunteer organization. Okay, but when you're an all volunteer organization that has a $7 million annual budget, that is not the same as NAAFA being a volunteer organization. Are you kidding me? And you have a $7 million budget, and you just have pharmaceutical companies doing shit for you for free.
Yeah.
Right? So you don't even have to spend all the $7 million to execute things, because when you have an annual conference, you don't have to dig all the way into your $7 million budget that came from weight loss surgeons and pharmaceutical companies and Weight Watchers, because Weight Watchers and the pharmaceutical companies are going to sponsor the conference too. On top of it. So I just the idea that we're unmatched, right? This is not me giving hope. You asked me how can people
give me some hope, Tigress.
Okay, so I went back into more evidence that they are terrible, but there is spaces like this are incredibly important. And they are incredibly important for fat people not to only recommend to other fat people. If you listened to this podcast and you thought it was really interesting, send it to your lefty friend who is not a fat liberationist, but is an anti-capitalist. Why are there so many anti-capitalists who will not question the diet industry and will not question pharmaceutical industry when it comes to fat people? You just said you hate, why do you hate Walmart, but you don't hate Weight Watchers, right? Did I say that in this podcast? I feel like I'm having deja vu. I might have said that twice, but that's a good one.
You didn't.
Why do you hate Walmart and not hate Weight Watchers? Even if you have no questions about, you don't want to lose weight, or you don't think other people should be forced to, or whatever, but why aren't you just interested in that as a capitalist force?
You know what? I think my theory is that they've been convinced by all of this tomfuckery that it's a social justice issue to cure fatness.
But that's why one of the things that we can do is make sure that we are having these conversations, not just in fat community, but with our friends who have similar values that are so rooted in our community, right? It's sort of what I was saying about even within this community, most people don't have time to look at the annual reports of 35 organizations that are on this list and see if they got money from Novo. Most of you are not going to do that, right? And that's reasonable. But now that you understand that that's how it works, you might just notice more when you see Novo mentioned, or when you see Eli Lilly mentioned, or Abbott Pharmaceuticals mentioned. And you might just notice it more, or you might at least have the questions. I think there are more people asking questions. There is, there's some hope in the fact that the this coalition had they had a press conference at the National Press Club, and we've only seen a couple articles about this Bill of Rights, because
Oh,
that could have been like they had a press conference at the National Press Club, and then all week long, all we saw was nothing but articles about this Bill of Rights.
yeah.
But
Yeah,
we
because
had
I hadn't
seen,
heard about it until you told me.
mhm.
So
Yeah, so
that's
we
good.
hadn't seen, so like it's, I mean, they're playing a long game. This is the thing that's important to know about that.
Yeah.
The pharmaceutical companies are playing a long game. This is, we're talking about billions of dollars, and we're talking about billions of dollars that even if they fuck up and ruin everything and get sued for that, they will still be rich people. Like, unless they
Mm.
actually go to jail for shadiness, they
Mm.
will still have their rich people lives, and it'll just be a matter of scale, right? It's, are
Yeah.
they billionaires? Are they millionaires, right? They're not going back to being thousandaires if they're a CEO of a pharmaceutical company, even if they get millions of dollars of fines, because they will already have made so much fucking money that
Yeah.
it's just like, so like that's not where the hope is, right? But where the hope is that we have people creating resources like this. Like, we have podcasts are powerful tools, blogs are still powerful tools. You know, your tweets, or I don't know what we call them on X. I refuse to call it X. Like, I mean,
No.
like, with actual human beings, I will call you whatever you tell me your name is. With corporations, I will call you what I want to call you
Yeah.
and what other people. No, this ain't pronouns for organizations, right? This is, it's Twitter. So like, um, but like there is a lot of power in that, and like policymakers don't listen to tweets, but journalists listen to tweets, and then things get in the New York Times, and policy listener makers listen to that, right?
Yeah.
So like there's hope that there's more dialogue about this kind of things. There are people asking more critical questions. We have to sometimes work from a harm reduction frame point. Like, they're gonna get these drugs covered.
Yeah.
They're going to get these drugs covered. I'm trying to imagine all the various places in the multiverse, and I would like somebody to come here through a portal and show me how they did it in some other multiverse where they don't get the drugs covered.
Mm.
But until that happens, I can't see a way, no matter how much I have, hope and abundance thinking and all that, I can't see a way that these drugs do not get covered by
Mm.
Medicare and by the NHS. But what we can do is work on harm reduction in the
Yes.
coverage of them, and like, you know education campaigns that help people understand the real risks of the drugs, the help people ask questions about the long-term effects of the drugs. Like, we can do harm reduction in that way, and also we can hopefully do harm reduction in ensuring that the bill language when these bills pass doesn't cause unintended consequences for fat people. Like, the intended consequence is cover these drugs, okay, and continue to cover weight loss surgery for people who won't take the drugs, and maybe cover a little of some of the other things too. And if that means that some people get good nutritional counseling, or weight neutral therapy, or something that is positive covered by their insurance, that's, at least there's a little bit of silver lining there. But
Yeah.
I just like calling shenanigans on the shenanigans is really important to me,
Mm.
even when it does affect the ultimate outcome, because like you don't get to call this a grassroots movement. You don't get to say that you're doing intersectional social justice work with and go unchallenged. If
Yeah.
I can't be anything but a gnat in the ear, then at least we're lining up a lot more gnats in their ears,
Yeah.
right?
Yes. And we can both be gnats in their
Yeah.
ears for sure.
Yeah. And in
Like,
terms of self-protection, I think just like fat community is the self-protection.
yeah.
Getting yourself around some people who will question these things, even if they're not sure what the answers are, who will at least question the
Mm.
motives of these juggernauts of weight loss,
Yeah.
um,
And us
gives
being
you
there as fat community for when people are recovering from taking these drugs, because I mean they give you weight loss to begin with, but at a year point you're already beginning to put weight on, and so being that soft place to land for people who are like, well, that was fucked up and horrible, and we can be there for them.
yeah. Yeah, and also, frankly, like, for people who are going to lose loved ones to these kinds of drugs and procedures,
Mm.
there's some really passionate folks in fat lib community whose passion comes from the fact that they lost people to weight loss surgery, you
Yeah.
know? And like I would rather they have their loved ones than us have them as advocates, but they
Yeah.
don't, and we do.
Yeah.
And like, and I'm glad that they have us as, like you said, like a soft place to land. I mean, it can be really frustrating, especially when folks kind of like flounced away from community to claim these things. We saw this wave at the beginning of the year of like, the influencers that were sort of like, I used to love my curvy body, but I'm trying to get thin now that I can get Ozempic or whatever. And like, okay, I mean, cool story, bro. And then
Yeah.
and if that works out for you, carry on. And if it doesn't, then we do, like, I know there are a lot of people who are like, and if it doesn't, then good riddance, because you shouldn't have burned that bridge with us. You
Mm.
shouldn't burn bridges with fat community um by flouncing away to pursue intentional weight loss. And also, if you do that and you fall on your face, I am not saying that you should just have like the warm welcome mat rolled back out to you automatically. I do think those are bridges that can be rebuilt when people are ready to do like the real work around
Yeah.
rebuilding them.
Yeah. Because I think that
Like I don't get to flounce away and then just dance on back. Like, hey guys, did you miss me? Like, you got to
yeah.
come back with some humility and with some commitment to changing, to like sharing with people what you learned the hard way, so that like,
Yeah.
or whatever, you got to come back with something. You can't just come back like empty-handed and sad. Like,
Yeah.
um,
Because
but
I think the reason why they flounced away is they probably have a shit ton of anti-fatness deep down in them that they've not ever looked at. And then that allure of thinness was too much to say no to. And so if they've come back and said, I've looked at my own anti-fatness, then we can be like,
and
yeah.
that's very different. And I think also, like, especially for folks who are from multiple identities that experience body-based discrimination, that the pursuit of weight loss can feel like a way of surviving, right?
Yeah.
It can feel like self-protection. I mean, it can feel like that for everybody, but especially if you've got it coming at you from a bunch of different directions.
Mhm.
You've got racism, or you've got anti-trans, everything coming at you from the government on down, or you've got anti-queer stuff or whatever that you are dealing with, and your ableism. Disabled people get told all the time that if they would lose some weight, their disability would magically cure itself,
Yeah.
even when that's 100% impossible. But like, there's all these ways where like the promise of weight loss might not be just about vanity. It might actually,
Mhm.
and it might just be about sort of like sociocultural privilege, but actually, like, I think this makes or breaks the difference between whether I make it to the next year.
Exactly.
We know that more often than not, it doesn't actually do that. But I
Mm.
think succumbing to it for those reasons is a little bit different than the people who just like want to wear cute clothes or whatever,
Yeah.
right? It
Yeah.
is different. Um, and in the end, do you want to, if you want to be part of community, you have to be part of community in ways that are not harming the rest of the community.
Yeah.
So if you go to pursue this magical dream and it all crashes and burns, you can't come back here with your toxicness. You have to detox before you come,
Mm.
like, or
Mhm.
like you have to come in and contain spaces where there are people who are willing to help you detox or whatever.
Yeah.
But I do think that, I mean, I might have, just on a sort of like individually, just like I was telling you about Toby Keith earlier today, like I don't generally like cheer when people die, but I'm like,
Mm.
fuck that guy, yay. And then like ultimately, like where my values actually are is like I wish he had lived and redeemed himself and stopped being a racist and blah 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 blah. But he didn't, so yay. But like also like he wasn't part of my community. For folks
Mm.
who are I've been in community with and they do a different thing than what I would do or what I think I would do or what I like to think I would do, and then they want to come back into community, then I might have that petty moment of like, oh, I see. Oh, here you come,
Mm.
Also, um, and also some of them ain't getting back in because they're coming back in acting like assholes, knocking at the door, acting like an asshole. You're gonna stay on the other side of the door. But I do think that there are folks that we can be that soft space for in a really like healing way that then ultimately builds community, right?
Yeah.
So, um, But I think, and I think that is where some of the beauty lies, is like, and for the rest of us who just stay in community and experience the beauty, right? It's what we talked about at the top of the hour about like being at FatCon and what that felt like. We can generate those feelings in so many other spaces. And that is the armor against Ozempic, 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 Ozempic.
Yes.
You
Yeah, it's
get yourself in a space where you don't have to hear that all the time.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Tigress, how can people support you and NAAFA?
If you have money, give money, right? Like, let's not be coy about that. If you have money to give, whether that's $3, $300, $3,000, if you got $30,000, please holler at me immediately. But like, you know, if you have money, give it to us. And if NAAFA is not the right fat activist space for you to give it to, find the one that is, or find the fat mutual aid that you can support or whatever. Like, give money in community, support, you know, the businesses that support us, and uh and you know, and the Patreons of people that support us, and the like, all of, you know, in all the ways. And again, especially for folks who are fat and also facing those other kinds of discrimination out in the world.
Yeah.
For us, if you want to give to NAAFA, you can do that through our website, naafa.org/give, NAAFA.org/give. And, you know, follow us on social media, engage with our content, you know, likes beget likes, comments, you know, jog the algorithm. You know, it's the trolls get bigger and more consistent, and the more we drown out their voices with voices of love and support, then the safer and more encouraging our online spaces are in fact community. So we're NAAFA official on most of the things. We are most active on Instagram, but we're, you know, we're on most of the other things that you love, and we'll hopefully soon be on some of the ones we're not really on TikTok. We're not really on TikTok. But we are working on that for this year. And I think we will have some TikTok presence this year. But we're NAAFA official on all of the things. If you see a NAAFA something else that is not us, there is another organization. I think it's a firearms organization that is not, that is us. We have not shifted our platform. That is not us. If you want to follow me personally, I'm also most active on Instagram. But same thing, like, I'm on all of the things. I'm just not that active on the other ones. My handle is do people still say handle? Am I dating my saying
no,
handle?
I think that's the right one.
my name on Instagram is Eye of the Tigress, letter IOF, the Tigress. And yeah, I think that's, and, you know, sign up for our newsletter. Oh, and definitely, we didn't talk as much about legislation as I do in some other settings, but we are working, you know, together with our colleagues at FLAIR, the Fat Legal Advocacy, Rights, and Education Project. We co-founded the campaign for Size Freedom last year. We got some support from Dove in doing that. And, you know, like, see, we just say who our corporate partners are. You didn't have to go read, you know, research us online to find out who our corporate partners are. And if you have questions about Dove, ask us those questions. I have questions about Dove, and I ask them those questions. So it's a little different than those Novo relationships with, and Weight Watchers relationships with other quote unquote advocacy organizations. But I digress. The campaign for Size Freedom works to uplift the conversation around passing legislation to outlaw size discrimination. And then to support the passage of that legislation by supporting local organizers who are working on that legislation. So this year we'll be, you know, supporting legislation in New York at the state level. As many of your listeners probably know, New York City passed some legislation last year, but New York at the state level, New Jersey, Vermont, Massachusetts, which I think will be the next state. I think my money is on Massachusetts to be the next state to pass anti-discrimination legislation based on body size. And so that will be something certainly to celebrate, and some good news.
So exciting.
I think it's going to happen in Massachusetts this year. I mean, knock on all the things, or whatever you do for good vibes. But and also possibly a couple more states this year. There are some things brewing in some places. There is a anti-weight bullying bill in Colorado that we will also help support. And we expect Colorado next year, possibly still this year, but definitely next year, to introduce like a fuller scale civil rights bill. But right now, we know for sure that there will be a bill against weight bullying in schools. So that is a great way to protect fat kids. So anyway, all of that stuff is on our website under the Campaign for Size Freedom tab, where we also have a petition that you can sign. And if you sign the petition and give us permission to contact you, then when we start doing work in your area or we hear about local organizers doing work in your area, we will let you know. So
Exciting.
that's, I think, all of the ways. That's all, that's all. I think that's all of the ways to find me. You can see all of our old NAAFA webinars on our YouTube channel, which is also NAAFA official. And we've just interviewed some like really amazing people over the years. I do the webinar show. Marcy Cruz does our fashion show. We have other kinds of special events, but we've had everybody from, from Deshaun Harrison to Dr. Charlotte Cooper to, we just had a wide range of scholars and activists and artists, Mary Lambert and our last one was with comedians Nikki Bailey and Chris Grace. Like, we just have really fantastic people who come and talk to us about being in their fat bodies and then just doing the badass stuff that they do. And people can watch, like, those are all free on our YouTube channel.
Amazing. And I'll link everything in the show notes so people don't have to go and searching. Yeah, thank you.
You don't have to pause, like, as Tigress just rattles off stuff, pause, write it down. Thank you so much. I know we kind of joked when we got started that we might do this for like 4 hours. I'm really grateful to your listeners who hung in with us for like, a probably longer than usual podcast episode, but I'm just really grateful for you, including me on this podcast where you don't always have guests. So thank you for that.
No, I mean, like I said to you before, if Tigress wants to be on the show, Tigress is coming on the show. Like, done. And thank you for all your work. You are amazing.
It is an honor to get to serve this community.
Yeah. Thank you.